Hello everyone, welcome to my video. The title of my talk is A Comparative Study of Rhythmic Pattern in Non-Native Mandarin Speech by Russian, Japanese, and Vietnamese learners. My name is Yiran from Beijing Language Culture University. For starter, what is rhythm in speech? It might have many explanations in many aspects. Here, it refers to the temporal organization of languages that could correspond to the auditory impression of eyecraft. Many languages can be classified into three different types, which is stress time, syllable time, or moral time. It brings us another question, the acquisition of this property by language learners. There are two major hypotheses about that. First one is the L1 transfer. There are many studies suggest that noticeable transfer could occur during the rhythm acquisition. Being analyzed the L2 English by 10 Chinese learners and Kawas investigate L2 English by 4 Japanese learners. Their results showed the non-native speech was located between L1 and L2. Meanwhile, other studies focused on the universal tendency during the process of acquisition. Audin analyzed the production of L2 English by learners from French and German respectively. The results showed that learners from rhythmically different L1 backgrounds followed similar developmental paths, no considerable L1 influence. Acquisition of some rhythmic feature is in order, which might depend on the markedness of those features in target language. Again, the target language mentioned before is a typical stress time language, like English, and the Mandarin, a typical syllable timed language, received less attention. So our goals or orientation is to figure out the rhythmic pattern in L2 Mandarin by typologically different learners from Japan, Russian, and Vietnamese. There are many differences in L1 backgrounds. For example, the target language here, Mandarin, which has very simple syllable structure, mostly a series, and each syllable have a lexical tone, in some cases like neutral tone. It will appear like a one reduction, but the frequency is not very high. It's often considered as a syllable-timed language. By contrast, Russian has very complicated syllable structure like consonant cluster that frequently use one reductions and final lacing, making it a typical stress-timed language. Furthermore, Japanese has also simple syllable structure with a feature like long short short commit contracted. It is considered as a typical moral timed language. Finally, Vietnamese. Simple syllable structure with similar system of lexical tone. It is also a typically syllable timed language. Under these circumstances, the rhythmic similarities between L1 and L2 can be subdivided into distinctly different, like Russian and Mandarin, and similar, like Japanese and Mandarin, and even identical, like Vietnamese and Mandarin. So, through the comparison of three pairs may lead us to investigate the differences in rhythmic pattern in both native and non-native Mandarin speech, and of course, find out the possible universe and diverse property in their productions. It will be very helpful for us to monitor the learning curves of different learners and decide whether we should conduct the adaptive teaching strategies. There is the pipeline of rhythm analysis. There are three major stages during the progress. For starter, we need our data prepared. We will have bunch of waves and tests. After doing the basic statistic, the information like ratio of gender, age, our background, and proficiency will obtained for further interpretation. Then followed by the intonation and the consonant and vowel classification. The alignment will provide the boundary of phoneme on syllable, and we will extract the duration values. Finally, we calculated the rhythm matrix and got a vector to represent sentence on speaker's rhythmic pattern. First of all, I want to introduce the data setup. There is little vulnerability that previous studies might have small sample size. It might bring other questions like between or intra-speaker variability. so the following aspects were slightly refined in order to validate the reliability of our experiment. 1. Total 227 speakers were selected from the BLCU SAIG corpus of Mandarin to minimize the influence of speaker variability. There are 16 native speakers and control group, 16 Vietnamese learners, 48 Russian learners, and 52 Japanese learners of Mandarin. Gender ratio is approximately 6:4, and the proficiency level was intermediate and above. In addition, each speaker had produced 103 identical sentences. Left column showed the detailed setup in this experiment. What's more, the next step is annotation and C classification. First of all, the HTK-based force alignment was conducted to provide the boundary of phoneme and syllable. Those boundaries were manually recalibrated during the related annotation tasks like mispronunciation or phrase break. We employed a relatively reasonable but straightforward C classification method. In Mandarin, there is substantial coherence within syllable and relatively weak connection between syllables. Thus, the compound vowels in Mandarin is hard to subdivide even in non-syllabic. So we treated the vowel, including the diphthong, triphthong, and the non-syllabic vowel as the integrated vowels. Last but not least, the calculation of the rhythm matrix. Durational cues was most easily perceived and the most frequently used to quantify the differences in rhythm. There are two primary matrices, pairwise variability index, PVI in short, and the interval measures. For example, the interval measures will calculate the percent of volic intervals and the standard deviation of volic durations with normalized versions. Left column lists the popular ones presented in literature and highly recommended. The overview by Lucchina, 2011 for more details. There are many tools to help us to reproduce the analyze, like TJA time group analyze for online investigation and a very user-friendly practice script by phoneme in UZH. Of course, you can maximize your flexibility to use many open source Python packages to manage the text grid file. After the compilation, we will have a bunch of vectors represent the rhythm features of sentence or speaker. The next part is result and interpretation. Firstly, we carry out a series of ANOVAs. The left shows the matrix and p-values for ANOVA, while the right shows the result of Bonfanari post-hoc test. The table told us that all matrices showed significant mean effect, and the most of pairwise comparison between L1s also have the significant effect with few exceptions. We investigated those matrices directly. We compared the three matrices separately in plotbox. Two preliminary findings are observed in figures. The variation in native speakers is relatively small, which means the native speakers might have kind of stable rhythm, especially in reading scale. On the other hand, values in all learners groups are higher than native speakers, which might indicate the partial existence of syllable time patterns, like higher variation in both consonant and vowels in their productions, regardless of their L1 background. The result of syllable-related matrix also confirmed it. It confronts the difficulty of encapsulating the cross-influence in rhythm with just a certain or a pair of matrices. The second analyze aimed to understand the distribution of speakers' rhythm according to their L1 background. With the help of principal component analysis, the idea was to figure out the correlation or distance between different groups by using all those matrices. As shown in figure, group Mandarin in red circle located in the middle right, group Russian learners in blue triangle located at the middle left, the group Japanese learners in arbor star, and the Vietnamese learners in gray square distribute between them with a partial mixture. The result suggests at least the distance between native and non-native is distinguishable, especially for Russian learner and native speakers. It partially supports that the distinctly different rhythm between L1 and L2 might have negative transform to cause a bigger accidence of their productions. Within non-native groups, despite L1 and L2 rhythm similarity in native groups were different, the distance between each group compared with native is not clear. Each group keep a certain degree of confusion between others, especially for Japanese learners and Vietnamese learners. We might preliminarily assume that learners still could not acquire the native-like rhythm directly, by the benefit of positive transfer, no matter L1 and L2 rhythm is similar or even identical. The more evidence was required beyond visual inspections, so we conduct several classification procedures. Firstly, it was three-class classification task between Russian, Japanese learner of Mandarin, and native speakers, which corresponding to three typical rhythm types in their native speech. Secondly, it was four classes task. With the addition of the Vietnamese groups, we used three different statistic models to train and test. All features were normalized by Z-score and test under five-fold cross-validation. All modes reached an acceptable accuracy in three classes tests. The overall accuracy is decent enough with the limited features. That shows the partial effectiveness of rhythmic in excellent classification tasks, but the accuracy dropped almost 15% when encountered into the four classes task. Confusion matrix generated from results may give us deeper understanding. As shown in this figure, there is no obvious confusion between native and non-native speeches, and little confusion between Russian and Japanese. Only two native speakers was misplaced. In four classic classification tasks, the Mandarin group still holds very high accuracy compared to non-native groups. Instead, the accuracy in non-native groups was not good enough. Most of the mistake was occurred between Japanese and Vietnamese groups. There are also many speakers was classified into Russian groups. Consider the result of certain metrics. It might indicate the existence of more or less stress time patterns in L1, L2 speech. Finally, there are three major preliminary findings worth to discuss more. Firstly, the identical tests were produced by all speakers. There is no difference in syllable structure between their productions, and the significant difference between each group were contributed to their L1 particularity indeed. We found out the distinctly difference between native and non-native speech reflected by both rhythm matrix and discrimination task, which is in line with our auditory perceptions. It's not too hard for a native speaker to perceive this noticeable accident beyond the segmental information, regardless of our background. Secondly, our study suggested that universal tendency would possibly condition the rhythmic pattern in non-native Mandarin. All learners present more or less stress time features in their non-native speech, regardless of L1 background. This finding let us assume that opposition of Mandarin might spot the central tenet of the structure conformity hypothesis, the universal traits in linguistic development that holds for primary language and also holds for the interlanguage. Finally, despite the neutral existence of partial stress time features, each group still shows a difference to some degree. By the benefit of extensive corpus analysis, each matrix in each group approximately distributed enormously. In Russian groups, some matrices keep quite constantly high values compared to the native, and conversely, in both Japanese and Vietnamese groups, a certain percentage of speakers did reach a native-like values, and other speakers' values lie between Russian and Mandarin group values. We could further speculate that the influence of L1 specific would still reveal in rhythm after it was conditioned by universal tendency. The distinctly rhythmic differences between Russian and Mandarin might delay or halt their rhythmic development by negative transform and cause kind of the fossilization. Right. The similar rhythm between Japanese and Vietnamese compared to Mandarin might accelerate or promote their rhythmic development and reach a native-like rhythm earlier by the benefit of positive transform this is end of my talk. Very appreciate for your attention. And if you have any question or want to discuss more, you can contact me via those following messages. Thank you again.